Well, Darlene Cobbey, at the time of the news, I was Darlene Hickerson, and I moved to Virginia City in 1973 with my two older children, and moved into an old ramshackle house that an aunt and uncle had owned, and my grandfather had lived in, and it was sold out of the family, and my sister and I lived there, and we paid $50 a month rent. So it was affordable. My sister also was a single mom. So we were living together, and she worked at the Ormsby House. I don't know how long it had been open. She got me a job there. I worked in the office upstairs, food and beverage, and then I worked night shift as a cocktail waitress. And I was possibly the worst cocktail waitress in the world. I hated it. And my sister eventually moved out of the house, moved in with her boyfriend, then husband. And so I was up there with my kids, and I was really searching, trying to find where I fit. I had two widowed aunts that lived on the same street. I think they looked at me as, questionably. It was, it was difficult. And then I met Jan Maximova, who lived with David, and we became fast friends. And she is the one that initially said, David's doing this thing, and I really think that you could fit in there. And I thought, well, it's better than what I'm doing now. So the infamous meeting was when I drove down here one day. I think it was summer, because I think they were sitting outside, kind of where the deck is over there. And I think it was David and Peter, maybe Chandler. I specifically remember David and Peter because they were like that. It's like I heard the shouting before I actually got there. And it was, and I only know this because I listened to one of David's old interviews, and he mentions it also. They were fighting over the editorial about Jim Miller. I think that had already been published, but they were still arguing it over, and I think that's when Peter and Chandler just walked away, and I was kind of like, well, I guess he does need help, so that's kind of how it started.
Wow, okay, so this would have been right after the Gold Hill News very first started, right?
Yeah, in 1974, I think it was.
Is this the Jim Miller editorial in the first
Is it in
issue?
there? I'm not sure. It has.
Or there is one. Right
Yes,
out the
yes,
gate.
yes. That's it. That's it.
So this is what they were fighting about, right
Yeah.
there. Pretty early on then.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, honestly, I don't know Peter that well or his writing. I think David has this flair that didn't necessarily mesh, with Peter's. Maybe not even Chandler's. David always, he could be critical, but he always did it in kind of he could poke you, but it was kind of in a playful way. And I don't think he ever lost that. That was kind of who he was. You rarely saw him really lose his temper.
Yeah, very true. You can read that throughout his writings,
Yeah.
Gold Hill News and beyond.
Yeah. I mean, there were a few times. I told John I was trying to remember specific things. David's father, Carol, worked for the newspaper. Carol was he kind of managed the money, what there was of it. And I think we used to probably, late after the paper was published, we'd go out and buy beer or something with, the money that we had. And Carol would just blow a gasket. His face, he would just start turning red and he would just explode. And David was always kind of like, well, that's just the way it is. This is what we do, so. But Carol was also instrumental in trying to keep us on the straight and narrow financially. But there wasn't a lot. We really had very little. And I think everybody kind of prided themselves in that, okay, we get whatever it was, $25 a week, whatever. And then we would get food stamps, and then we would get commodity foods. And that worked out pretty well. I mean, my rent was $50 a month, so it was an interesting time in that the end of the 60s, the Vietnam War had ended. It seemed like there were all sorts of possibilities, and I think that newspaper kind of helped bring it together for a certain segment. I mean, there was a lot of music going on here. There was a lot of art going on here. And for me, I just felt kind of privileged to be around it. And wow, these people, they're talented. And David was so, everybody is a genius, in their own way.
Yeah, you see that possibility, that the Gold Hill News clearly played with, because there is such a diverse amount of coverage. It's not just politics, or it's not just arts and entertainment, but you also have great features on the pets and the children in town, and everyone is a genius in their own way. I see that.
Yeah. The characters. There were so many oddballs. I mean, I'm sure there are still oddballs, but David was very good at picking them out. Some of which, I kind of went, I don't know if I would have gone that direction, but okay, whatever. Speaking of David never getting angry. So there was one time, Jan's here, David's here, they're in the back. This looks nothing like this house. It's really a shack. And in the kitchen, in all the windows, there's flypaper hanging because there are no screens anywhere. And David has his long, waist-long hair. And at some point, he's doing something, and he is bending down, and he comes back up. And this flypaper is caught in his long hair. And he is swearing, just furious. And Jan and I looked at each other, and we had to leave the house because we were laughing so hard. It was hilarious because, it was just... And then he was more furious at us for laughing.
I'm sure that didn't make it better, yeah.
So that was one time. And then another time, speaking of the freedom, and to do as you want with your kids running around. And one of the women of the Comstock, Julie Lovely, she had a baby, and she'd come to visit us up at the News, up at the cabin where Sam has this place now. And she came in with her baby, and the baby was naked, and she puts the baby down on the floor, and she's talking to people, and everybody's being very cordial, and, we're busy doing something and not paying a whole lot of attention. At some point, she picks the baby up and starts to walk out the door, and the baby left a big pile of poop on the floor. And David was never strict. I mean, he was a very free-form father.
Sure.
And that was the other time. He went barreling out the door saying, you get back here. And those are really the few times I can ever really remember him blowing his stack.
Wow.
You know?
Well, that's got to be great working environment then, if you know that, because I'm sure things genuinely did get stressful throughout working on the paper.
Oh, yeah.
And
no money, time constraints. Yeah.
And knowing that he's not going to blow his gasket over that, but I understand drawing the line at the poo on the floor.
It was great. It was, just, all these kind of laid back hippies. The kids don't have to, they don't have to wear clothes. But it was, there's a line there. There is a boundary there somewhere. So.
Hi, Mo. You come to be in the interview? Did you have any office pets or office dogs? Or?
I am sure we did.
Yeah.
I am sure we did. I don't remember. Well, David had a dog. I think it was Ace. I mean, I had a dog, but they didn't come to work with me. It seems like there were always dogs around. You know, and we moved around. I mean, the newspaper was here, the newspaper was up the hill, the newspaper was in that mining building across the highway down there. Yeah, we pretty much, you know, wherever we could, we moved. And it was, I mean, it wasn't just the matter of selling ads and trying to put it together. It was then getting it to a printer down in Sparks. And we all had cars that were iffy at best. So yeah, it was a challenge.
Yeah, and doing that on a weekly basis, I don't
Yeah.
think really
Yeah.
challenging. So yeah, that's a great a great point about where was it printed and what was that printing process like, and maybe your kind of printing workflow for the week. What was that like?
It was always moving, you know, always moving. Jan and I would go out to do ads, and Jan was an avid rummage sailor, and she had a good eye for clothes, the old clothes. And so we would dress up in old clothes, hats, you know, long hair, go in and, you know, people didn't know what to make of us. Mostly they were very receptive. I would say Virginia City was the least receptive because of the first editorial. So, you know, we ran into some very strident people up there. Don McBride, the Bucket of Blood, and Ely Orms, is that what he had? Anyhow, you know, he was like, get out of here, don't darken my doorstep, kind of thing. But, you know, you could go to Carson City, Reno, Tahoe. It didn't matter so much. It was a novelty. So we would go out and try to sell ads. We would come back with checks in cash, dump it all out on the desk, see how long we could operate, how many can we print, and then we would start it all over.
Yeah, the ads in the paper are wonderful, and you know, if I pick up today's newspaper, I barely look at the ads.
Yeah.
But these, I want to sit, enjoy the custom art in them.
Yeah.
The time capsule nature, that these are places that are gone or have changed so drastically.
Yeah.
It's the ads are wonderful in there.
Yeah. I mean, and regular artists. And David was so good about, okay, do an ad for the Cabin in the Sky. And so Dan Murray was one of the artists, and he drew a very elaborate, fancy cabin. Didn't look anything like that cabin, but it didn't matter. You know, David would look at it and go, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful. You know, he was quite willing to let the artists do their art.
And that brings up the point of the covers are works of art in themselves. You could just frame the covers.
Yeah.
And hang them on the wall. They're just beautiful.
Yeah.
Who are some of the artists that you worked with?
Oh, gee. Well, there was Dan Murray, and I actually lived with Dan for about a year till I realized that he was an artist and a great artist, but not necessarily a great companion. So, and then Steve Powell was another great artist, and he married a good friend of mine who lived right down the hill, Leanna McNeely. And then Jim McCormick, of course, Steve Saylor, you know. I know I'm leaving many people out, but yeah.
It was quite an assemblage of artists. So
Yeah. Oh, of course,
probably keep
Buckeye.
them all.
The Buckeye is just notable for, you know, all the stuff that he did.
Yeah, it's quite a get for a local newspaper to have a
No kidding.
world-renowned
No kidding.
artist like
Yeah.
of many different flavors.
Yeah. Joanne Johnson, who, you know, Robin has just found David's collection of her stuff, which is just incredible.
What is some of the, you touched briefly on the reactions of maybe some local business owners that you went to for ads, but what was the reaction of your general readership or public that you got?
I think that they liked the humor. They liked even the serious subject that it touched on. I think sometimes it was why should I support a paper that is so far removed from where I am? And so you kind of had to work through that. How do you convince people that that this could be important too? This was an important place. I mean, this is why Nevada's a state. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And you do look in I like the long running list of your subscribers.
Yeah.
And you'll see people from across the country. I saw some subscriptions going out to Mexico, some going to the East Coast. Gerald Ford, I think, someone had signed him up for a subscription. So the presidential desk or the White House or what have you. It reached much larger than the community.
Yeah, and well, you had to. You had to, particularly because the community wasn't that supportive.
Right.
I mean, there were many
Or
people.
that big.
Or that big. And there were many people in Virginia City that did love it. But, they were not necessarily business owners. So.
And then another interesting part of the paper is the different correspondence you have actually all over the world. Eventually, you and John became the Honduras correspondent, is that right? We just Dateline Honduras.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So, whenabouts did you move to Honduras? What was that like?
We moved in, I think it was September 1977. Yeah, it was an adjustment, from very dry Nevada to a hot, muggy, tropical place. Honduras was beautiful. I mean, we were there at exactly the right time. We lived in a tiny town that had a lot of dirt roads, right on the coast. John worked in bananas, and I mainly tried to improve my Spanish that was non-existent when I got there, and take care of the kids who were going to school there.
And you still stayed in touch with the news because we've seen some of your correspondence.
Oh yeah, and I should find some of David's letters. He used to write us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was an interesting time, and Jan actually came down to visit us, I think, and stayed a month, and David Moore came down to visit us, and and that was a time there were no cell phones. The phones that we had down there were kind of like when they had the crank phones up here, you couldn't always get a long distance call. And when you did, it was likely to be cut off in mid-sentence. So, we corresponded by letter.
Did you ever get issues of the news sent to you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you could keep up with the old neighborhood.
Yeah.
And the goings on. Cool. So this was an internationally subscribed newspaper then.
It was. But, newspapers, they're notoriously hard. When our friends, Kristen and Betty, bought the Comstock Chronicle, I just thought, can we talk them out of it? Because it's such a hard business. You really have to put yourself out there. And it's not an easy thing. And, people are very willing to not subscribe, not to spend their money on something that they don't necessarily agree with. So.
Yeah, looking back, how did working on the paper influence the rest of your life? What are some takeaways that you had from your time at the news?
Never work on a newspaper again was one of them. Mm-hmm. I don't like selling things. I mean, I could do it. And even when I came back, I did many fundraisers for, there was the preschool, there was the Fourth Ward school. And it was like, I just don't care if I ever do another fundraiser in my life. It takes your energy, and sometimes you just don't have that much to give anymore. But I think it was a good influence that you you could get out there and try something totally new and different. Do it as good as you possibly could, for as long as you possibly could, and then go, okay, we did it. And now we can say we did it.
And how wonderful that all these copies still exist. And
I know. It's a good thing David was a hoarder.
Yeah, there's a fine line between historian and hoarder that I'm guilty of myself, so I understand. But bless him for it. For
exactly.
keeping this assembly together, because if he hadn't, I don't know if anyone else has the full run of the gold.
Yeah, because there isn't any, it's not electronic.
Right.
So, yeah.
So going back to kind of the beginning, you have this first meeting here in Gold Hill that starts with a fight and ends with a job offer, essentially.
That was it. And it was, David had this thing about, okay, Jan and Darlene will go out and if they can get other people that they know, go out and sell these ads. He used to call us the magic ladies. That was one term that I know Peter Lawfer did not like. And it didn't really matter to me one way or the other. It was, we just did what we had to do, and it was a hard job. There was another thing, as long as we're talking about advertising, we could have taken money from Joe Conforti. Dave Moore said, if you take money from him, I'm leaving. We just can't do that. We can't. And, Robin said, well, why would Dave do that? Well, Joe was a pimp. And it went against Dave's moral code to be taking money from someone like Joe, who, he was known to buy off people, politicians. So, we pretty much stuck to that. I think there was some advertising that Joe did in a roundabout way. I can't remember what it was now. But no, we did not take any money from him, although I do remember there were a group of us that went out to his house somewhere in Sparks, kind of a flamboyant ranch house, tract house, pool, lots of girls around this pool. And Jan and I, we dressed up. I had on some kind of a square dance dress, turquoise with silver, and I can remember walking past Joe, and he pulled me over to kind of sit on his lap, and I was like, I really think it's time for us to go. It was that was hard for me, that kind of, because this was right after Roe v. Wade. Women were coming into their own, and you could only put up with so much bullshit from men. And, I didn't want to put up with it.
Understandably, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's good that you didn't have to interact with him that much.
I mean, there's that fine line between, he's well-known, he's a well-known person, but how do you, it was,
But the Cabin in the Sky had a long-running ad. How did that?
That he had, that was the restaurant. It was, but it was really Joe's place. Mm-hmm. And Chef Tommaso, as I recall, I think he leased it from Joe. So that was how we got that money.
I see.
I mean, it would have been easy to go to Joe and say, how about a donation of $1,000 a month or something that would have really made a difference to us, but we never did it.
In some of the other interviews we've done, people have mentioned toward the end, when it was clear that this was not a viable enterprise going forward, and just the numbers just weren't there to continue. A few people have mentioned about, well, why can't we get a sugar daddy, right? And this could be an example of that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And several people on staff just saying,
It was basically Dave Moore.
Yeah.
I mean, he was real, because he was an integral part of it.
Yeah.
And he just put his foot down. Now, I think Jan and I would have said, please take the money. You know, then we won't have to work quite as hard as we do.
sure.
But, you know, there would have been strings attached. And, yeah, we didn't need that.
Yeah, and at least you get to do it for however long you get to do it, even if that's finite.
Yes, exactly.
At your own terms or without
Yeah.
those strings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the Gold Hill News way, it seems, right?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And I think one of the things that I didn't remember that Jan brought up when she was talking to someone about, I mean, the struggle for money. And I mean, she and David had a pretty solid relationship in the beginning. The news, you know, kind of, it became not as solid. And then there was the Christmas issue where we had some color added, which cost more money. However much more, it took all of the money. And I remember that was kind of the beginning of the end for Jan. It was just like, you know, you can't, we worked so hard to get this, and you could have done this issue without this color, but you chose to spend it, and now we have no money again, which means that I have to go out and work harder and I think it was, you know, him not realizing just how hard it was for her. And then for me too. I mean, but you know, I stuck with it even afterwards. And after, I didn't have to do so much ad sales. I think when Jan kind of left, we had other people, other friends, mostly women that would try. There was Lynn Hughes, Lila Crandall, and then I got to stay in the office and try to organize it, which was, you know, something they needed.
What are some of the stories that stand out to you after all these years?
Well, the biggest story was, of course, Oscar Bonavena. You know, because David had an in with Joe right there. So, you know, that was like, whoa.
And the news broke that story, right?
Yeah, with an exclusive from Joe. So,
Incredible.
yeah, that was like both Dave Moore and David Toll were just, oh my God, we've got to, you know, get there right now. We've got to get it all down. Yeah, that was pretty exciting.
And coincidentally, I believe that issue was the largest, if not one of the largest
That could be.
issues of the year.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was coincidental or not, but it had a ton of ads in it.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Well, it was a big deal around the state. I mean, he was, you know, Oscar Bonavena was well known, so. And the guy that killed him became well known. So.
Yeah, and you guys had very thorough coverage of that whole trial and everything. And
Yeah.
Great original art in the courtroom.
Yeah.
Courtroom sketches.
Yeah, I was just looking at a sketch that I think Steve Powell did it of Bonavena, and it was like, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even remember that, so yeah, it's pretty amazing.
What are some of the photographers that you worked with?
Well, Gary Elam was a big one. Bill Germino. Of course, Jimmy. Jeez. You know, I mean, Jimmy wasn't really a photographer. Jimmy was kind of, I want to do something, maybe I can write, and David managed to get him a camera, or somebody gave him a camera, and off he went. You know, and I think the first time we entered the Press Association Awards, Jimmy won.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah, when they knocked down the church in Dayton, Jimmy was living right next door and grabbed the camera and went out and caught it with the marker going right down with the church.
Yeah, iconic photo.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Did you ever go to the Press Association Awards? What was
Oh,
that
yes,
like?
we did. I remember one year we went, where were they? Must have been in Winnemucca. Rode in the back of a pickup all the way there. There must have been maybe 4 of us in the back and 2 in the front. And I can't imagine what we looked like when we got there. But it was a time where, you know, it was, well, we were still young. You just were who you were. You didn't have to necessarily dress it up or, I mean, it was, yeah, and David was very good about, you know, he accepted, I remember him accepting the award and having us all stand up and introducing us, and, you know, it was very special.
Yeah, there's a nice healthy stack of awards that we have in the archives over there. There's
Yeah,
many, many awards.
yeah. Well, people just didn't take the time to write like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was more like if you worked for a regular newspaper, I guess they said, yeah, go out and get this story. You've got an hour and a half and get it back in. And, you know, it wasn't, they didn't work that way. They really took their time with it. I mean, I think David did probably minimal editing on people's work.
What was the Blowhard Awards?
How did that come about? I think Bo Johansson always won it. And it was, we must have had some kind of a, people nominated people and then people voted. And because Bo Johansson really was a terrific blowhard, and people knew it, and I think we would have the party down at the Cabin in the Sky. Yeah, great fun. A good reason to have a party.
No kidding. Yeah, that's great. And the ceremonial instrument you got to blow when you won. That's just, yeah, that's a really fun.
And I think Bo, he might have still been running the gas station when, you know, when he won that award, which meant that he was constantly communicating with people throughout town, and, you know, his free form flow of dialogue, I'm sure, impressed many people.
He's a reigning champion.
Yeah.
And then the news did some other events, right? Like the V&T Depot, like a movie watching party.
Yes, and
some other.
we raffled off lunches. Women made lunches, and then they would raffle them off to people, and then you had to sit with the person, and they ate your lunch, and we had it there at the depot. We had something up at Pierce's Depot too, I believe. Yeah.
So it was much more than a paper, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Those were, I'm sure, our fundraising events.
Right. Anything that we haven't discussed that you think is important about the news, or?
Well, let's see. I mean, I look at it as I had moved here, you know, after my grandparents were born in Virginia City, as were my mother and her 13 siblings. So I had ties. I mean, I'd been here many times. So when I came up here, and then David and Jan were here, that's how I met John. So I kind of look at it as, you know, a serendipitous meeting, you know, finding my people, essentially. You know, meeting John, venturing out to other places, you know, having 2 more children at a later age. You know, it was, I might not have done it. Well, I probably would not have done it. So, you know, meeting Robin. Yeah. Robin would not have met David. David would not have had this house. You know, I mean, there are just so many things that, you know, kind of came together that made it all work.
Absolutely. Sounds like most everyone that interacted with the news on that intimate level went on to bigger and better things.
Yeah,
And they
yeah.
point to the news as kind of the
And it was
place where that's sprouted.
a positive thing. Like listening to Jimmy's little video that he sent, and I just went, oh, that makes me want to cry. You know, because he's been away from it so long. Coincidentally, Jan eventually married Jimmy's brother, Barry. Didn't stay married long, but it was like just all these different, you know, the things we did then.
Oh, and the sun's coming out right now. How perfect.
Just because.
That's a good note. Okay, well, great. I think this is wonderful. We
Okay,
can always
good.
do another one if more stories come to mind. But
Well, I'm
this
glad
is
to
something
be able to pull some of it out of the cobwebs
Yeah, I bet.
because it's pretty well buried there.
Well, thank you.
No, thank you.